The Legacy of Charles Hamilton Houston. Charles Hamilton Houston was born on September 3, 1895, to William Lepre Houston and Mary Nay Hamilton Houston. William Houston, the son of a slave, worked his way into the American middle class and served as an attorney in Washington, D.C., and Mary Houston worked as a seamstress. Charles Hamilton's education began in the segregated public school system, where he graduated from Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. Houston later earned his undergraduate degree from Amherst College and a law degree from Harvard University, with a period of service to the United States Army in between. From 1917 to 1919, he served as a first lieutenant in France. Charles Hamilton Houston would leave a lasting legacy to the civil rights movement due to his work at Howard Law School, his mentorship of Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, and his role in dismantling the Jim Crow laws. Charles Hamilton Houston is known as a groundbreaking lawyer and educator, and is credited with having recognized that the wavering civil rights movement would achieve its greatest and most lasting successes in the courtroom. As the United States entered the First World War, Hamilton joined the Army and achieved the rank of first lieutenant over an artillery division in France. There he witnessed and endured the racial prejudice inflicted on black soldiers, and later stated, "The hate and scorn showed on us Negro officers by our fellow Americans convinced me that there is no sense in me dying for a world ruled by them. I made up my mind that if I go through this war, I would study law and use my time fighting for men who could not strike back." After World War I, Houston enrolled to study law at Harvard University, where, in 1922, he became the first African-American editor of Harvard Law Review. He graduated Harvard with a Ph.D. in 1923. Following his studies at Harvard, Houston joined the faculty at Howard University, where he effectively transformed the Howard Law School from a school for dummies to the West Point for Negroes. In 1929, Charles Houston achieved the position of Assistant Dean of Howard University and began recruiting young black law students. One such aspiring law student was Thurgood Marshall, who Houston took a special interest in mentoring. Houston would share his desires to use the court system and the battles for equal education to further the fight for equality for all Americans. Marshall's first major court victory came in 1933 when he sued the Maryland University to admit a young African-American Amherst University graduate. In review of the case, H.L. Mencken wrote that it is brutal and absurd, and they should not object to the presence among them of self-respecting and ambitious young Afro-Americans well prepared for his studies by 4 years of hard work in a Class A college. In 1935, Houston left Howard to pursue the role of head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Marshall followed his mentor to New York and later became the chief counsel for the NAACP. During this time, the United Nations and the United Kingdom solicited Marshall to assist emerging African nations of Ghana and Tanzania in drafting their constitutions. Though Marshall received accolades throughout history for his civil rights work, it was Charles Hamilton Houston who authored the plan to attack the education system and who guided young lawyers such as Marshall through the process. From 1935 to 1939, Houston served as a special counsel for the NAACP and became the architect of the legal challenge against the Jim Crow laws. Often referred to as the man who killed Jim Crow, Houston helped lay the foundation for virtually every civil rights case before the United States Supreme Court. He went after what he thought was the weakest link of segregation, the segregation of black students. In 1939, in the case of Gaines versus Canada, Houston won the argument that it was unconstitutional for the state of Missouri to deny black students enrollment into the state's law school on the grounds that there was no comparable institution which was promised in the separate but equal provision. In an effort to build established precedents in the courts, he continued to fight small segregation battles in the courts. His plan was to end segregation by forcing states to either create costly parallel law schools or integrate the existing ones. His greatest victory came after his death in 1950 in Brown versus Board of Topeka Education in 1954. In 1954, overturning the Petsey versus Ferguson racial doctrine of separate but equal, the United States Supreme Court rendered a decision in Brown versus Board of Education that permitted equal access to educational opportunities regardless of one's race. Had it not been for the fortitude of Charles Hamilton Houston and the resilience of the young black lawyers mentored by him, equal rights for black students would have continued to suffer. It was black judicial pioneers such as Houston who understood that it would take a lifelong dedication to change the mindset of a nation who not long before thought it was justified in owning another human.